Welcome to the Clandestine Radio Podcast, Season 2.
Good evening, curious minds out there across the internet, and thank you once again for joining me for another episode of the Clandestine Radio Podcast. This is part 2 of episode 2, In the Shadows of Time, Our Lost and Hidden History. And I've got some interesting places that we're going to travel to tonight. I don't want to delay for too long because we've got quite a bit to get through. This one probably won't be quite as information dense, I guess, as the first one. But there's still a whole lot that I want to touch on. And we probably won't even get through all of it, to be perfectly honest. But BTR is going to be really good. We'll talk more about that at the end. But for the time being, let's go ahead and check out a little place called Yonaguni Monument for our first stop on our journey through history. As intriguing as the ruins we visited last week were, there are things we have yet to talk about that completely fly in the face of our beliefs about the antiquity and civilizations on this planet. Places which exist so far outside of the mainstream historical narrative that they defy any attempt to be explained away, or to be simply shuffled back into our current historical timeline. One of those places sits roughly 82 feet down beneath the waves, about 62 miles from Taiwan, off the coast of the southernmost island comprising Japan, Yonaguni. The waters off the coast of Yonaguni have been a popular diving location for some time, particularly in the winter months, as some brave or incredibly stupid souls, for some reason, enjoy observing the large population of hammerhead sharks which gather there. One of those souls was Kihachiro Aratake, director of the Yonaguni Cho Tourism Association, who, while seeking a good spot to observe those sharks, dove down a bit further than usual and began to notice something he hadn't seen before. Straight lines, and 90-degree angles, lots of them, all rising from the ocean's floor. Realizing how rare such a thing like this was in nature, particularly in the strong ocean currents there, he took a closer look. What he would find would defy logical explanation and ignite curiosity from around the world. He saw what appeared to be architectural structures, something that looked to him to be man-made, even castles of sorts, with stairs and much, much more. Soon after, a group of scientists under the direction of Masaki Kimura from a local university would visit the formation to get a better look. Kimura was at a loss to explain what he saw. Kimura is the founder of the Marine Science and Cultural Heritage Research Association and University, and a trained geologist. He is well versed in understanding and interpreting ancient sites in the area, so surely he would be able to better understand Arataki's finds, and hopefully be able to put to bed any unfounded notions of its man-made nature. However, what he saw would impact him for the rest of his life, and lead to him becoming a vocal proponent for its validity. Kimura would describe seeing what appeared to be a massive network of buildings, monuments, castles, a stadium, and even other buildings, all associated by a complex system of waterways and roads, as well as what appeared to be a massive archway or a gateway comprised of massive stone blocks perfectly fitted together. Teams of divers would continue to explore the ruins and the surrounding area, eventually declaring that there were at least 5 subsurface architectural sites near 3 offshore islands. They all vary in depth between 100 feet to 20 feet. Kimura has also pointed out a number of marks that point to a man-made and intentional design, such as a plus sign and V-shaped signs in the stones. The formations would quickly draw controversy as multiple TV shows would exaggerate and even fabricate claims and add to it labels such as Japan's Atlantis, which would all help to muddy the proverbial water, so to speak, and fuel a debunking campaign by mainstream archaeology, ardent to stick to its official story. Soon, two camps would form, between those certain of its man-made nature and those certain of its natural formation, with respected scientists and geologists lining up on both sides of the fence. There are many scientists who believe the site to be remnants of an ancient city, one that might have existed around 10,000 years ago, when the sea level was much lower, since it does not appear to have fallen into the water, but to have been constructed in the site where it lays, making the site most likely to be attributed to Japan's prehistoric people, the Jomon, who inhabited this area as early as 12,000 BC. While still considered primitive by today's standards and thought to be largely hunter-gatherers, they are attributed as the first creators of pottery and art in that region. Reports from Ancient American Magazine described a pyramid-like structure among the ruins 600 feet wide by 90 feet tall, dating back to at least 8,000 BC. Kimura is quoted as saying, quote, "This structure is not a natural occurrence. If it were, there would be accumulated debris from erosion, but no such stone fragments were found." Robert Schoch, geology professor at Boston University, who was the guy that first put forth the water erosion theory about the Sphinx enclosure and about the Sphinx itself, which would indicate a much, much older age to it and the surrounding things than previously was ever thought. Very compelling stuff, definitely something you should check out if you're not familiar with his work. But he was quoted as saying after his first dive there that it looks like a series of giant steps, each one about a meter high. Its cross-section is essentially similar to a step pyramid. It's an intriguing structure. Natural erosion combined with the process of stone fracture could potentially create such a structure, but I haven't found a process that could produce such sharp step sections. Further evidence to support an artificial nature was the discovery of a small stone pile nearby. Several of these were actually found, and they were said to be similar to the main structure. These miniature pyramids are constructed from stacked stone slabs in a stepped pattern, measuring 10 meters wide and 2 meters high, or 32 feet wide by 6.5 feet high. Professor Teruaki Ishii, a geologist from the University of Tokyo, said that the structure dates back to at least 8,000 BC, when the land was submerged by rising sea levels after the last glacial period. He added, "I hope it is man-made. That would be exciting. I think that it's too early to draw conclusions. It could be a natural formation, but at least parts of it are most likely man-made." The monument or formation, depending on which camp you side with, rest in somewhat murky waters and very, very strong currents in that area. Those are two factors that have made it much harder to get a definitive answer. It has been linked to everything from Atlantis, of course, the lost continent of Mu, and speculation surrounding its true nature and origins rage on to this day. If you're curious about it, I would of course recommend you do your own research and come to your own conclusions. But one thing is for sure, it is definitely quite the anomaly, and for that reason alone, it belongs on our list. And before I go any further, I think now is probably a good time to go ahead and preface everything retroactively by saying, please forgive the pronunciation on some of these names. I've never heard them. This is all me trying to read some of these, and certain dialects I'm really not just super familiar with, and the correct way to say some of these names. So just bear with me on this. I'm doing the absolute best I can. Back in 2001, Advanced Digital Communications, a Canadian company working in conjunction with the Cuban government on an exploration and survey mission, first reported some interesting sonar anomalies off the northwest tip of Cuba, near where the northern Caribbean Sea, Gulf of Mexico, and Atlantic Oceans meet. In an area covering roughly 1.2 square miles and at depths between 2,000 and 2,460 feet, sonar imaging began coming in that resembled symmetrical and geometric stone structures resembling an urban complex. Intrigued by the findings, the team would return to the site a little later armed with an underwater ROV that filmed sonar images which looked unmistakably like various pyramids and circular structures, all made from massive smooth blocks of stone resembling hewn granite. Due to the depths that the find sits at, human exploration without the aid of at least a submersible designed for that depth would be pretty difficult. These depths would even push the upper limits of what commercial divers with atmospheric dive suits could be capable of. Marine geologist and former deputy director of the Cuban Natural History Museum in Havana, Manuel Iturralde, called for more samples before drawing conclusions about the site, saying the results so far were very unusual. He estimated that it would have taken at least 50,000 years for the structures to be submerged under the depths that they are at, placing the construction somewhere in the Paleolithic period, well before mainstream archaeology believes humans were remotely capable of such feats. Offshore engineer Polina Zalitsky and her husband Paul Weitzwig, the owners of Advanced Digital Communications, said that they use sophisticated sonar and video devices to find, quote, some kind of megaliths you'd find on Stonehenge or Easter Island. Some structures within the complex may be as long as 400 meters, or about 1,312 feet, wide, and as high as 40 meters, or 131 feet, sitting on top of each other. They show very distinct shapes and symmetrical designs of a non-natural kind. We've shown them to scientists from Cuba and the US and elsewhere, and nobody has suggested that they are natural, end quote. According to Mr. Weitzwig, an anthropologist from the Cuban Academy of Sciences has said that the still photos taken from the live videotape clearly show symbols and inscriptions. Geologists have put forth the theory that an ancient land bridge may have once connected Cuba to Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula, and interestingly enough, the layout of the site does bear a resemblance to that of the pyramidal designs found in Mayan and Aztec temples. The most perplexing questions, among several that this site presents us with, is if it was once part of a larger continent or a land bridge that collapsed into the ocean from some sort of catastrophe caused by plate tectonics, then why do the structures all appear to be intact and show little to no signs that would be expected from such a catastrophe? Or, if they were in fact constructed where they lay, as they do appear to have been, how and when was this done? Now, bear in mind that these structures sit at depths ranging from 2,000 to 2,500 feet, or more than 1,600 feet lower than the lowest level that the oceans are believed to have reached, even during the last glacial maximum, which was about 20,000 years ago, at the tail end of the Pleistocene epoch. So how, then, did what appears to be massive pyramids and other structures, in what can really only be described as a temple complex, end up where they are, especially if our currently accepted model of history is remotely accurate? Furthermore, why aren't more people asking this question? How could this have been accomplished if the wheel was only invented in 3500 BC or so in Sumeria, if even a basic sundial wasn't even invented until 3000 BC in Egypt, if nothing remotely close to this undertaking had ever been attempted anywhere else on Earth in our recorded or assumed history on this planet? How? While many questions surrounding this find are still and may forever be unanswered, one thing is beyond question. Whatever these ruins are, they are significantly out of place and well out of time, making it easy to see why this site belongs on our list of lost and hidden history. And we're going to get into this. I'm going to post a picture of the sonar imaging on the Facebook page, along with a few of these other places. But this place is really, really interesting. It's very, very strange looking. It's hard to dismiss it as anything remotely natural. This was obviously constructed by humans at some point, or constructed by someone at some point. Let's put it that way. Alright, now for this next one, I want to give you, once again, a little pronunciation warning. I'm sometimes decent, occasionally, with Japanese pronunciations, but I struggle pretty hard with Cantonese and Mandarin, so for this next location, please bear with me as I try my best to get through this. Now, let's set our scuba gear aside for a bit and travel back to dry land for our next location. And instead, head to Fenghuan Hill near Xi'anbaikun village along the shores of the Chu River in Zhejiang province of China, where we will take a look at what is unquestionably one of the most intriguing sights to ever be discovered. In June of 1992, 4 farmers were draining the water from 5 small ponds in their village. As fate would have it, these ponds weren't truly ponds at all, but rather 5 enormous man-made caverns. Enormous doesn't really even do this place justice, though. And a further investigation would reveal 19 more caverns nearby. These would come to collectively be known as the Longyu Caves, or the Jiunanhai Stone Chambers, thought to date back a minimum of 2,000 years and represent one of the largest underground excavations ever recorded. These 24 hand-carved caves have perplexed experts from every discipline. In fact, everyone that has ever examined them, leaving scientists from around the world working in the fields of archaeology, architecture, engineering, and geology completely baffled regarding how they were built, by whom, and for what purpose. They comprise an area of 322,917 square feet. Each grotto goes down around 98 feet underground, containing stone rooms, bridges, gutters, and pools. A series of massive stone pillars were left to support the ceilings, with the ceilings, pillars, and walls all being covered in highly uniform patterns. Something that calls to mind the marks of a large piece of machinery, honestly. Again, this is something that I'm going to leave a picture of because it's definitely something that you really have to see to understand what I'm talking about. If you've never seen this place, it's truly remarkable. This is a pattern that you'll find at other places around the world, but I'll save that for the BTR. But just know that it definitely is extremely uniform and would have been incredibly tedious to do as like a ornamental pattern or something. The sheer quantity of rock that had to have been removed during the excavation is an awe-inspiring 35,314,666 cubic feet worth of material. Scientists have calculated that even with 1,000 workers working non-stop day and night, it would have taken them at least 6 years to have completed it. While that's a very conservative estimate, for a number of reasons, honestly, this is only based on purely the hard labor required to carve the stone. It's not taking into account, among other things, the incredible care and precision used by this theoretical army of sculptors, meaning the actual workload would have far exceeded that estimate. They don't even know what sort of tools were used, as no tools have been found in the area, and scientists remain baffled by how they achieve such symmetry, precision, and similarity across all of the 24 caves. Their estimates also don't take into account the removal of all of that stone and its transportation. There has yet to be found any archaeological evidence of where the incredible amounts of stone went once it was removed. Many other perplexing questions remain as well, such as the complete lack of fish found when they were pumping out the caves, or any other signs of life in there. How were the caves so well preserved after millennia since their believed construction, and in an area that has seen numerous floods, calamities, and wars, weathering everything that surrounds these caves? The caves themselves, including the markings that I mentioned before, which cover every square inch almost of these caves from floor to ceiling, are still completely visible and precise, showing no signs of wear. Considering some areas of the caves descend well out of the reach of any light that may be visible from their openings, areas where it is completely pitch black. I don't know if you've ever gone caving or been pretty deep into a cave, but that is a special kind of darkness. That is a darkness where you lose all sense of reality and where you are in space and time. It is darkness. But the work continued. along with the markings that I'm talking about, those precise little carvings, the little lines, that's all the way to the very back of these things in pitch blackness. How did they complete this work? Remember, this was at least 2 millennia ago, and nothing that could have been used for light has ever been found there. And no traces or markings from the soot left by any kind of fire has ever been found. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, duh, they were flooded, you've clearly never tried to remove soot with water before, because it is insanely difficult. The Chinese people have kept detailed records of all official projects dating back to the Shang dynasty around 3,500 years ago. This would almost have to have been something commissioned by an emperor for such a massive undertaking, as the local villagers have never been of the scale to support such a momentous construction. Another burning question also has to be why? No tombs or funerary objects and absolutely no artifacts whatsoever or signs of a previous habitation have ever been found in the caves. If all of this isn't strange enough, I've yet to see mention of how any of these scientists can even explain the accuracy of everything from the height and width of the caves, the distance of pillars, and symmetry of carvings. Everything seems to follow a specific formula, a type of mathematical geometric precision that would be a complex endeavor even with today's technology. This site is truly something that has to be seen to be appreciated, which is why pictures of some of these sites, including this one, again, will be posted on our Facebook page in their own post, with some photos that you may find pretty compelling. So be sure to head over there. They should be up by the end of this episode if you're listening to it when it drops. And if you want to be really awesome and you haven't already, you can throw us a like, review the show, give us a follow, all that stuff. It really, really does help us and helps others find the show, and it is sincerely appreciated. And that's all that plug, I promise. There are a lot of sites around the world that would force one to question our widely accepted narrative of history. Sites such as Baalbek in Lebanon, which dates back to at least 11,000 years ago and housed massive temples that were attributed later to the Romans, despite the fact that they were constructed with some of the largest slabs of stone ever used in any man-made construction and drastically larger and heavier than anything else that the Romans had ever built with. Some weighing in at a massive 880 tons, if you can imagine that. And that is a conservative estimate, as well as showing signs of multiple phases of construction indicative that a much more ancient civilization had laid those massive foundation stones, and then the Romans or whoever else came in and built on top of it. And one of these slabs that was abandoned and unfinished, and the most conservative estimate that I was able to find estimated it to be at least 1,100 tons. Or places like the Plain of Jars, deep in the mountains in northern Laos, with its 3,000 giant stone jars, each one weighing several tons and up to 10 feet tall. The giant spheres of Costa Rica, where around 300 spheres weighing up to 17.6 tons, all shaped into near-perfect spheres and scattered all about. It's been attributed to the Olmecs, I believe. I don't have any of this in the notes. It's just stuff that I wanted to mention. But that's some really interesting area down there, too. The Olmecs themselves are pretty interesting. We really don't know much about them. Or the Nazca lines, or the Sajama lines in Bolivia. Both of them showing impressive and enigmatic features. There are truly more out-of-place and time sites around the planet than I could ever hope to cover, even in a multi-part series like this. Few people even truly comprehend the scale of Egypt's pyramids, or the likely man-made plateau that they rest upon. For this series, however, I just wanted to touch on some of the more obscure and enigmatic ones that tend to get a little less attention than the others. However, I would like to spend this last little section taking a look at some of the seemingly out-of-place artifacts, or OOP arts, which is a fun way to say that have been documented, ones which, without a doubt, speak to a much, much older and unknown history here on this planet. Starting with number 1, my personal favorite, the Baigong or Baigongshan iron pipes. As we spoke about in part 1 of this series, see, there was a reason for my little history lesson. The Iron Age officially began around 1200 BC, so a bit over 3,000 years ago. Bear that in mind as we discuss this next part. Still sticking with China, just a little bit longer, but this time moving to Qinghai province in the Heisen, Mongol, and Tibetan autonomous prefecture. Nailed it! To an area that mainstream historians believe the first nomadic people that first arrived at approximately 30,000 years ago. So these would be Neolithic, Stone Age hunter-gatherers, for those that are keeping up. Mount Baigong, or White Mountain, is where we find our first possible evidence of out-of-place artifacts. From accounts from the region, the discovery was first brought to light as early as 1996, but it would remain largely unknown until in 2003 when a group of U.S. scientists searching for dinosaur fossils stumbled upon a series of what appeared to be ancient metal pipes, all of which protruding from and seemed to originate somewhere within Baigong Mountain. An interesting place in general, as many believe the mountain actually resembles a very ancient pyramid structure of some sort, with the focus being on an area surrounding what is described as 3 triangular-shaped cave openings located within the front face of the mountain. The openings of the 2 smaller caves have unfortunately collapsed. However, the largest cave opening, measuring a pretty impressive 18 feet high, is still accessible, and this seems to be where most of these pipes originate from within. Other pipes have been found along the shore and under the waters of Tuosu Lake, which lies 260 feet from the mouth of the larger cave with an east-west orientation, and other vertical ones rising up from the lake bed itself. It is believed that these pipes, by most accounts ranging from 4 to 16 inches in diameter, run from the mountain going underground and emerging from within and around the nearby lake. In 2002, the Chinese government sent scientists to investigate the site and to take samples to be analyzed at a local smeltery in order to determine their metallurgical composition. The report that would come back would divide the scientific community. About 8% of the material could not be identified positively. The remaining material was determined to be a combination of ferric oxide, silicon dioxide, and calcium oxide, all of which are byproducts of a long interaction between iron and the surrounding sandstone. Further samples were brought to the Beijing Institute of Geology within the Academy of Geological Sciences and were examined using the thermoluminescent dating technology. The result came back that if these were indeed iron pipes that had been smelted, they were made 140,000 to 150,000 years ago. Compare those numbers to the dates we spoke of at the beginning, and you'll quickly notice that that's at least 137,000 years before the date currently understood to be the introduction of iron smelting. A follow-up study in 2007 is also alleged to have shown that some of the pipes were also radioactive, which, as strange as it sounds, is a kind of common occurrence with several ancient sites in both India and China. Despite all of this, there is still a strong push from mainstream science to simply dismiss the pipes as fossilized tree roots that had just happened to originate from a pyramid-like but totally natural mountain formation. Theories abound as to the origination of the pipes and range from ancient aliens to lost human technology and even to the possibility of a group of human-ish primates that evolved separate from us but died off at some point in antiquity. Whatever the case may be, I personally believe that this site warrants further examination and that it is certainly worth taking a look at for those curious about these sorts of things. It wasn't just incredibly easy to find information about this place. I did find some verifiable information here and there, There's a lot of misinformation out there as well, so be wary of some of the kind of crazier sites talking about, aliens did everything and whatnot. But it's a very real place, and it has been examined by several different institutions and disciplines, like geologists, metallurgists. Several people have gone out there and tried to understand what is going on with these things, and if it is actually pipe. They look like pipes. They do not look like tree roots. And I've never seen tree roots emanating in direct lines out of a mountain in my life. So I don't know. It's very compelling. It's very interesting looking stuff. As with anything, I always tell you to do your own research and come to your own conclusions, but I think it's definitely something worth checking out. Number 2, the Oklahoma Iron Pot. Now this one took some digging, but from what I've been able to piece together, back in 1912, worker Frank J. Kenwood was feeding coal into a large furnace at the municipal electric plant in Thomas, Oklahoma, when he came upon a large solid chunk of coal that he stated was too large to be used whole. So he began to break it down with a sledgehammer. Once he managed to crack it open, a small metal object popped out from the center of it, leaving an impression in the coal that was a perfect mold of this object. And that object would turn out to be a small iron pot. Another man, Jim Stahl, also a fellow employee of the municipal plant, witnessed both the coal indentation as well as a small metal pot that ejected from the center of it, as he was allegedly there working right beside him and saw the whole thing occur. The two men would trace the source of this coal back to the Wilburton, Oklahoma mines. Robert Fay of the Oklahoma Geological Survey has stated that the coal from the mines is approximately 312 million years old. As fascinating as a find such as this would be, and as many questions as it would no doubt raise, unfortunately, the only real remaining evidence of this story's validity comes from the signed affidavit from the finder, along with a few photos of it. Since this object is frequently brought up in these sorts of discussions and even touted as somewhat of a smoking gun in everything from ancient aliens to lost civilization debates, I felt it only right to take a look at it and to give you a fair and honest assessment of it. Personally, while it is no doubt somewhat compelling and is reminiscent of other discoveries alleged to have come from coal, I feel that it lacks the tangible evidence to truly consider it that much further. Like all objects, it seems, that are out of place, has mysteriously vanished, so it can't be further examined. The coal that it came from can't be further examined, so there's really just no way to prove the validity of this anymore. There's a signed affidavit, and I believe it's at like the Creation Museum somewhere, something to that effect. But there's evidence of it online, trace stuff I was able to find, a couple of accounts. There's a lot of conflicting stuff and a lot of just outright lies. So if you do research it, be careful what you read. But I thought it was interesting, and you see it all the time on all kinds of stuff like this. So I felt I would be remiss if I didn't at least bring it up and give you a little bit of my thought on it. Number 3, the Iron Pillar of Delhi. Standing an impressive 23 feet 8 inches high and with a diameter of 16 inches, estimated to weigh 6.6 tons, this mysterious iron pillar, located currently in Delhi, India, is thought to have originated elsewhere, though its true origin is still a matter of great debate and mystery. Believed to date back to at least around 400 AD, during the reign of Chandragupta II, this massive iron pillar has one feature that makes it stand out possibly more than anything else. It has remained for all these years free of major rust. Believed to have been produced by the forge welding of sections of wrought iron, but appearing long before evidence of any forges capable of such a massive task are known to have existed, its ability to resist corrosion is attributed to a passive protective film at the iron rust interface, believed to have been created through several factors such as the presence of second phase particles, slag and unreduced iron oxides, in the microstructure of the iron, high amounts of phosphorus in the metal, and the alternate wetting and drying existing under atmospheric conditions in the region. The full explanation of how they believe this all works is fairly complex and pretty dense, so I won't go too much further into that. But considering this is an anomaly in the world of wrought iron, and given its somewhat mysterious origin and purpose, I thought I would give it a quick mention for those who may have never heard of it. However, for those out there who subscribe to the ancient alien theory, I highly doubt that that is the case with this artifact, and I hate to bust your bubble. It is a very intriguing artifact, though. There are several inscriptions in there, and a passage has been, I don't know it's not carved, but it's been placed into the metal in some form or fashion. Engraved, not quite. It's sort of like, almost as if it was stamped into it while it was still in a soft enough state to accept it. It's really interesting looking. It's got sort of a bell looking top to it. It's something that you kind of just have to see to know what I'm talking about. A lot of people have probably seen it. If you ever do watch like the ancient alien shows, they brought it up on several of them saying, that it doesn't rust at all, and that's not entirely true. It doesn't really show any visible rust, and it definitely doesn't rust like any other iron or wrought iron, especially wood, but it's not completely impervious to it. But the process and the purity of it and the skill that it took to make it definitely stand out, particularly during that time period when you're not all that far removed from when humanity first really started working with iron. So it was a massive undertaking whenever it was completed and by whomever it was completed. Definitely worth giving a look, and I wanted to make sure that I at least mention it while we're going through things of this nature. Number 4, the Williams Enigmalith. While I've spent more time today debunking OOPArts, including the 2 that I just mentioned to some degree, and definitely while I was researching things to bring to you tonight, there remains a few things that do seemingly defy explanation, at least according to our accepted timeline and scientific processes. This next object would seem to possibly fall into that category. In 1998, while out on a hike deep into the wilderness, electrical engineer John J. Williams noticed what appeared to be some sort of a plug or electrical connector sticking up from out of the ground. Curious as to what it could be, and considering it's way out in the middle of nowhere, far away from any known settlements past or present, and miles upon miles away from any industrialization of any sort, he decided to try and pick it up to check it out. As he began to dig it out around the plug, trying to free it from the ground, he quickly realized it was, in fact, some sort of 3-pronged looking device embedded within a small rock. According to Williams, who consulted a local engineer and geologist to examine the specimen, the rock is composed of quartz and feldspar, with a small percentage of mica. Geological analysis found it to be about 100,000 years old, and the plug, quote-unquote, shows no traces of having been glued or welded by any known means, indicating that the plug was there at the time of the rock's formation. This plug allegedly presents a weak magnetic attraction, and ohmmeter readings show that it has a strength close to that of an open circuit. The metal prongs are protruding from a piece that is separate from the rock itself, and it does not appear to be manufactured of wood, plastic, rubber, metal, or any other recognizable material. X-rays have revealed that the component extends into an opaque internal structure within the stone. Despite giving an open invitation for the specimen to be examined by any researcher who is interested, with only the caveat that Williams is allowed to be present, the rock isn't damaged, and that he doesn't have to pay for the testing himself, still no one has taken him up on it. While it kind of looks like a weird plug stuck into a hole in a rock, and the scientific community seems pretty certain that it's a hoax, the lack of anyone willing to take up his offer and properly debunk it once and for all is kind of intriguing. I can't make any claim to the, for sure validity of this object, but Nonetheless, it is quite interesting, and no list of out-of-place artifacts would be complete without at least bringing it up. Number 5. The London Hammer. In London, Texas, way back in 1936, Max Hahn and his female friend were out for a stroll along the Red Creek just a ways outside of town. That's when they happened to look down and see a curious piece of loose rock jutting out of the side of the creek with a bit of wood embedded in it. Finding this to be a bit odd, they decided to pick it up and carry it home with them, where it would then just sit on a shelf for about another decade. Eventually, though, his son would let curiosity get the better of him one day and would make a decision that would create a worldwide sensation, and for many cause them to question the history that they had been taught their whole lives. Deciding he had to know, and how this piece of wood was sticking out of that rock. Max Jr. would break this rock open to reveal not just a piece of wood, but the head of a hammer that was attached to it inside of the rock. Jeff Williams, a certified geologist, has stated, quote, "It was a prehistoric hammer, part of the handle still intact inside some very old rock, and part of the handle actually is starting to go through a process called coalification. It's where you have organic material changing into coal. As to the exact age, the hammer itself was found in the Travis Formation. It's a concretion of sandstone, and it typically takes about 140 million years to form. The hammer itself is made up of 96.6% iron, 2.6% chlorine, and 0.74% sulfur. Interestingly, the iron has not rusted since its 1936 discovery, much like the Pillar of Delhi. And the wooden handle is unmineralized, with small traces of carbonization. While rapid concretion can occur naturally, and it would be insanely difficult to prove that it wasn't somehow involved in the creation of this oddity, it is still pretty far from a common occurrence and requires specific environmental factors. Much like any artifact such as this, there are fervent believers and staunch doubters in equal measure. It does, however, at least for now, remain an enduring mystery and one worthy of further examination, as well as a mention on this list. While there are so many places around the world with sites and artifacts that simply don't seem to fit in our official history, the battle between mainstream historians and lost history researchers will likely rage on for a long time and end without a satisfying conclusion. So I guess ultimately, it all comes down to what you choose to believe. Which side of the evidence seems to make the most sense to you personally? There are a few more points that I plan to discuss with you in next week's TBR, but for now, I want to leave you to do your own research and to form your own conclusions based on the evidence presented. Don't rely on others to tell you what to think and believe. Look for yourself and think critically about the evidence that you uncover. Because, as with everything that I cover on this show, my goal ultimately isn't to tell you what to think. It's simply to invite you to do so. That's going to about do it for me for tonight. In this week's BTR, I'll be discussing some pieces that from this series that just kind of stand out to me personally, I guess, and I'll be talking about that may tie many of these places together in some way, and bring you one last artifact, the one thing I have yet to find a remotely satisfying argument against, and that I think might just blow your minds. I've got a couple of other little locations that I kind of just want to go through, but I either didn't have time to get them in this or the last episode, or didn't feel that it was worth doing a whole section on, but I definitely want to at least bring them up to you. I'll probably also go over why I didn't discuss certain sites that you may have expected me to cover in this series. So be sure to tune in next week for an extra long BTR episode that will be packed with new info, as well as my thoughts on some of these things. Check the Facebook page for episode release info, as well as photos of some of the places and things that I mentioned this evening. I'm going to make an individual post just for this episode, and I'm going to put up pictures of some of the more intriguing stuff, just so that you can kind of get a visual representation of the things that I've been talking about. Because like I said, a lot of this stuff is something that you really have to just see to truly appreciate and understand. Don't forget to, you know what I'm about to say here. use the poll on Spotify and check the Q&A section, or leave me a voice message. It only takes a second, and it's just good manners. I really appreciate you guys joining me for tonight. I hope that you'll join me next week for the BTR, because I've got a ton of information. That BTR is going to be its own full episode just about. And I kind of want to talk about my feelings on some of these things a little bit more in detail too. But I would love to hear your thoughts. So again, I invite you to interact, because I really want that to be a major part of this show. I need a little more back and forth from you guys, because that stuff really helps to shape the content that I'm creating. And your involvement truly does matter to me. That really is all that I've got for you for tonight. But don't worry, I will talk to you guys again real soon on the next Clandestine Radio.